It's a Wednesday golf polo special on the latest episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. The NHL-wide breakdown of all of the top fantasy targets on every single team rolls into the Washington Capitals and what's going on with Ovi and the boys. Let's get this paper.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The fantasy hockey game, sometimes you got to look back to get ahead, and that's exactly what we're doing on the Wednesday edition of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Salute and shout out to the everydayers holding us down, making us your first listen every single day. Steele and I are down to Monday, Wednesday, Friday on the episodes all August long. And then you know what it is. September, full court press into fantasy draft season. We'll be back to 5 episodes, perhaps 6 a week, Steele. Who knows? Things are going to get spicy up in here. And we'll continue our breakdown of every NHL squad in the league and fantasy angles. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Right over to you, Mr. Roden. Washington Capitals, top 5 targets, Ovi and the boys. What's your take here? A busy squad in the offseason. Hit me with what you're seeing in Washington and who you're feeling on this top 5 list.
Look, this is a different looking Washington Capitals team from last year. They have 4 new additions in the forward group, 2 new additions on the blue line, and 1 in the blue paint. So they saw it clearly what happened last year in the playoffs. Swept 4-0 against the New York Rangers, a team they struggled against all season long, a team that struggled with scoring goals at will like we've seen them do in the past. They were a bottom 5 team in goals for, only ahead of teams like the Anaheim Ducks, San Jose Sharks, and Chicago Blackhawks, and Seattle Kraken. We know how bad they were in the offensive zone, but they were one of the only teams to be in the bottom 5 in goals for, yet still make the playoffs. So with the new additions to this squad, I'm actually kind of excited to see what happens with guys like Andrew Mangiapane, Pierre-Luc Dubois, Logan Thompson in the crease. So very excited, but we'll get going with the guy who's been there his entire career at the number 1 position for fantasy targets from this Capitals team. Alexander Ovechkin is the number 1 guy still. And even though we knew there would be a dip in offensive production, we knew that this was going to be happening at this point in his career. He's going to be 38 years old soon. September 17th is coming up, and he'll be 38 years old going into his
39 still. He'll be 39.
39 years old going into his 20th season in the NHL. So it's the nature of the beast. We knew what was going to happen, but still at this point, he is still so fantasy relevant for any fantasy GM out there. Another 31 goal season in the NHL, which he has done pretty much his entire career. There's never been one season where he's been below a 30 plus goal season. Yes, there was the one in the shortened COVID year. He missed, 10 games there, still had 24 goals, but for the most part, he's the best goal scorer we have ever seen in our life right now. Austin Matthews may have something to say about that throughout his NHL career, but Ovechkin has the chance to break Wayne Gretzky's record of the most goals ever in the National Hockey League. I traded for this player in my Keeper Dynasty League. I know he's 39. He's going to be 39 years old. I still think he brings so much value to the team. Again, like I said, 31 goals, 65 points total. He was a plus. He had 20 penalty minutes. So the penalty minutes have gone down a little bit, but still 272 shots with 162 hits. He continues to fill out the peripheral categories, except for the blocks, not part of his game, but hits, shots on net, power play points. I know the power play struggled a little bit last season, but I expected to get back to a form of where they once were with John Carlson, Dylan Strome balling out right now, Jacob Chychrun, Pierre-Luc Dubois, Andrew Mangiapane getting into that mix as well. Alexander Ovechkin, the number 1 target from this Capitals team.
Most definitely. Like to throw this one out there. He's a slam dunk number 1 on this team still. And these are the situations with players like Ovechkin, Crosby. You can throw maybe Malkin and others into this conversation that they've just been so good for so long that when it comes to fantasy, and obviously these guys are still game-changing talents for their team every single night in terms of putting points in the win column, this is where we got to bring up this old saying, Steele, and separate the fantasy from what it means on the ice. And Ovechkin still definitely brings game-changing ability on the ice and is absolutely pivotal to this team's success, quite clearly. The fantasy angle is one you have to maneuver a little bit more carefully. Value still there. You covered all the points. But when it comes to Ovi this year, Steele, Alexander the Great, OVO, the Great Eight, the Russian machine, you know I love talking about the greats that have been the faces of the NHL for the past 2 decades. Watching Ovi play, been lucky enough to watch him play live once or twice. He is worth the price of admission. And I think when we've seen him over the course of his career, and I do want to move on to the rest of this list, we try and keep you guys getting in and out in 30 minutes tight. Monday, Wednesday, Friday until September, got to get that plug in. He has nothing less to achieve in his career, Steele. He's got cups. He's got a Calder, 3 Harts, Richard, 3 Pearsons, Art Ross, Conn Smythe, you name it. What he doesn't have is that record, and you can see a glisten in his eye. He wants it more than perhaps he wanted that cup. I'm not going to say that. He is a winner. He wanted the cup, but you know what I'm getting at. And now the team is improved around him. So what I wanted to spit out was you can't help but feel that 65 points is going to be at the low end of what I expect from Ovi and the boys this year. I know it's not a guarantee that this team is just better because they brought in all these faces, but I'm buying into it anyway. Number 2, you already mentioned his name. He had a big stepping out year last year for me, Steele. 67 points for Dylan Strome. I know he had 65 the year before, but I'm liking the confidence. The shot totals are starting to creep up. You know what I'll say? He needs to shoot that biscuit more. The peripherals aren't really there. But if you're buying into the increase in talent around him, Dylan Strome, for me, has 75-point caliber. This is a good young player, Steele, and maybe it's a little risky at 2, and there's some other more safer plays down this list. He's number 2 for me. Dylan Strome, hit me with your take on that.
Just real quickly to go back on Alexander Ovechkin, where I think he will fall in this year's draft. I think he is going to fall a little bit down the draft board, but he is still a late third round, 4th round draft pick, in my opinion, with everything that he does with the peripheral. So I just wanted to spit that out. I think your pick with Dylan Strome, he's definitely shown what he can do offensively now at 26 years old, being with the Washington Capitals. He's been with a few different teams now. He seems to have some chemistry on that top line with Alexander Ovechkin as well. It's on the riskier side. I'm going with a guy who I believe has bounced back after being away with a scary injury, a guy who's on the blue line, who quarterbacks, who gets power play points. And I expect the power play to be a lot better this year with the additions they had. So my number 2 guy, fantasy target from this Capitals team, is John Carlson. I believe, look, you know, when you look at the team as full, Dylan Strome had a career year, 67 points. John Carlson had 52 points, just below him. But again, you know me in the peripherals. I'm looking at peripherals all day. And when you look at the fantasy points and where they all finished last year, John Carlson finished ahead of Dylan Strome in fantasy points in categorical leagues, as well as just outright fantasy points. Not significantly, but he still he finished higher than him by 15 or more points in the fantasy realm. So for me, I'm going with John Carlson. I actually expect Carlson to do a lot better than what we saw last year. He 52 points in 82 games, 40 penalty minutes, 194 blocks, which is almost a second best for him throughout his career. 69 hits, 176 shots on net. Again, still 15 power play assists and 5 power play goals, or 6 power play goals. I expect the power play to be a lot better with those new additions. For me, I like John Carlson on the back end. I see 60-plus points this upcoming season. I expect this entire Washington Capitals team to be a better team offensively, and that also includes Dylan Strome. I think you can hit, you hit it on the nose. I see 70-plus points in Dylan Strome's future this upcoming season or in the next 2 years. But for me, John Carlson holds the more value in fantasy leagues because of the peripherals he holds, plus what he does on the power play.
Definitely a little bit more of a safer option, and I love 100%. John Carlson. So let's talk about him after the break a little bit more. The rest of this list, perhaps a sleeper candidate or 2, Steele. Look, just because there's all these new faces in the lineup doesn't exactly mean success. However, you gotta like what's already been going on. They were a playoff team. Let's not forget, even though when they showed up in the postseason, They kind of disappeared. We'll talk about it after the break, along with the rest of our top fives, of course. However, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Indeed. You need to hire. You need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data. A matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, messaging, and everything else you need so you can connect with ideal candidates faster. Right now, listeners of our show get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just head over to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and tell them you support the show by telling them you heard about it on the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. You need to hire. You need Indeed.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Continue to make sure you hit the subscribe button, not just for us, but make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Sports Today YouTube channel. You can also find them on the free Amazon Fire TV channel app. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7, both on YouTube and the Amazon Fire TV channel app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Flip, before I hand it back over to you, to wrap up on John Carlson. I do believe you could easily get this guy in the 7th or 8th round. If he falls any farther than that, it's an absolute steal, in my opinion. He'll do wonders for your team. I do expect the Washington Capitals, based on them being a playoff team last year, the new additions they got, I expect them to be a lot better, both on the power play, special teams, and overall offensive production, both on from the forwards and the defensive group there. But John Carlson was my second target. I'm with you with Dylan Strome, just not ahead of John Carlson as a fantasy target right now. Dylan Strome comes in at number 3 for me for every reason that you said. Career high 67 points last year in a full 82 games. He's been overall healthy over the last 2 seasons. He seems to be fitting in well with Washington. He's been with 3 different teams now in his career. Started with the Arizona Coyotes. Then he was with the Chicago Blackhawks. Now he's getting the chance to play with Alexander Ovechkin, the greatest goal scorer we've seen in our generation right now. You would like to see a little bit more of the peripherals filled out with this player. And if he can do that this next season, he has the chance to be ahead of John Carlson. But with only 169 shots, 61 blocks, and 12 hits last year, still fell in that same area on the power play, still had 22 power play points, just like John Carlson. But again, the peripherals speak volume to me when it comes to categorical leagues and those type of formats. Even fantasy points, those points still add up tremendously. So for me, Dylan Strome comes in at the number 3 position, but I can definitely see with this team heading in the right direction, the trades that they made, the additions that they got, he could easily get to 70 points this next year because he is first and foremost a playmaker, but he's now showing us that he has the goal scoring ability. This is he had a 16% shooting percentage last year, 17.5 in his last year with the Chicago Blackhawks. So he's got the scoring touch. He's more of a playmaker, but I see what he's doing right now and the value's there.
Most definitely. To close out my point on John Carlson, just to get back to that, wanted to finish off there. He's just been impressing me for so long in the NHL. Yeah. You covered all the angles properly. Just wanted to get it in there that at number 3 for me, we can be interchangeable on that front. OV1 for sure. Strome, Carlson, they're in there. Those seem to be the ideal 3 off the board first for this Washington Capitals team. Then things get a little interesting. And look, I am buying into the move, Steele. We've talked about it already at length here. I think they are going to be an improved team. However, on paper, it looks good. Let's see them on the ice. Jacob Chychrun, obviously an intriguing fantasy piece. He's been all over the map during his NHL career. Matty Roy on the back end. Look, I got Charlie Lindgren at number 4 because headed into last season, very uncertain about the goaltending in Washington. And actually, it was probably one of their strengths. And when I do look at their numbers, the roster, I don't hate the blue line overall. I like the additions. Obviously, Rasmus Sandin already there. John Carlson we like. Martin Fehérváry, not from a fantasy perspective, but a solid third pairing D-man. This team is going to be improved. So if you're looking at Charlie Lindgren as a decent second or third goalie option, I'm not saying I'd be very comfortable with him as my number 1 goaltender. And with Logan Thompson in the cage, he will be pressing him, I think, a little bit. Maybe he eats into some of those games. I'm not going to say it all together because of how good Charlie Lindgren was last year. 2.67 goals against, 911 save percentage, 6 shutouts, and a 25-16-7 record. So if we are going to drink the Kool-Aid as much as we are, and this team does improve, offense gets better, the defense gets a bump, they bring in Logan Thompson, you can't help but feel overall that this is going to be a more confident bunch and getting more wins. So Charlie Lindgren, for me, is the 4th guy off the board for the Washington Capitals, and I would be comfortable with him as my 2nd or 3rd goaltending option, although depending on the format deal, I think getting him as your 3rd goaltending option, if that's how late he is around, 1, I don't see it, and 2, that means you're already ahead of the game in that league because people are slipping.
People will be slipping if that's the 3rd goaltender for yourself off the board. Look, for me, this is where you target a goaltender. It's interesting because of what both transpired last year for Lindgren and Thompson. We know what happened in Vegas. Some injury concerns with Adin Hill and the goalie carousel. Charlie Lindgren took over for Darcy Kemper last year. They both finished with almost the exact same record. Charlie Lindgren finished 25-16-7, a 911 save percentage, and a 2.67 goals against average.
Yeah,
he did,
similar.
however, have the 6 shutouts, which was very impressive. But Logan Thompson in himself also had 25 wins, 14 losses, and 5 overtime losses. A 908 save percentage with a 2.70 goals against average, only 1 shutout. Very similar records, very similar stats when it came to save percentage and goals against average. I think with Charlie Lindgren, now that he's been there for 2 seasons, and he really did take over from Darcy Kemper last year, who played very poorly.
Yes.
I think that is clearly, you're right. That's who's going to be the number 1 to start the season. But however, Logan Thompson as a backup, he could definitely take the reins from Charlie Lindgren at some point in the season if he starts to slip. So Charlie Lindgren would be the 4th fantasy target and the number 1 goaltender from this Capitals team that I would be looking at. Don't sleep on Logan Thompson at all, because he would be a 3rd string goaltender for your fantasy team as well. I could definitely see him getting up to 30 games this next year too. So a little bit of a split, but I'll say Lindgren starts the year off for the Washington Capitals as the number 1. I think you could definitely get Lindgren somewhere in that 11th round, 12th round right now.
That sounds
maybe
perfect.
people do sleep on him and he starts dropping a little bit later into the round, which I'll greatly appreciate that draft to my fantasy team as well as a 3rd string, maybe 2nd string goaltender, but definitely target a goaltender as the 4th option from this Washington Capitals team. There's so much more to talk about. The new additions in the forward group, the additions on the back end as well. We're going to get to all of that and more. We still have our last fantasy target for this team. Who will it be? So many names to talk from. Tom Wilson still out there. The new additions of Pierre-Luc Dubois, Andrew Mangiapane, your boy Connor McMichael. Does he fit into the top 5 fantasy targets? What about the blue line? Jacob Chychrun and Matt Roy. Rasmus Sandin, who I've talked about as a potential target as well on the back end. Lots to talk about. We'll get to all of that and more after the break. But first, this episode is also brought to you by Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. That's why Flip and I, we always use the Game Time app. Game Time is the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guaranteed. There's so many flash deals, zone deals, last-minute tickets. Easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event that you're interested in. Views from your seats in the venue, the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and job loss protection. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. Buy tickets in seconds with only 2 taps. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find all the last-minute seats. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Continue to hit the subscribe button and the follow button. We appreciate all that love and support you show us every single month, every single day. 7 o'clock in the morning, like Flip said, Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, when you can find our episodes in the month of August. And then right when September comes back, we're ramping back up into full
Yes,
gear.
sir.
21 episodes a month, 5 days a week, getting ready for the fantasy hockey draft this upcoming season. We got one last spot here, Flip. One last spot for a fantasy target of the Washington Capitals.
Yep.
There's lots of names to choose from, and I'm going to let you go first.
Appreciate that.
Who are you looking at here? Because there's some interesting names, of course, but I think obviously two really pop into my mind right off the bat. But I wouldn't be surprised if we went a different route right now.
That's okay. Let me hit you with this take about the Washington Capitals overall. This team isn't very sexy. They don't exactly jump off the page anywhere except maybe Ovi. And looking at some of these names, I think that means if everything, again, not to sound like a broken record, but everything that we say does come to fruition, all these pieces gel, we expect the power play that I had this up here because I did want to mention it. The power play was 18th best in the NHL. So bad, not awful. All these improvements happen. And you look at a guy like Tom Wilson, who, when it comes to banger league beauty over his career, you look at these guys to really solidify and round out your team and usually steal. And I don't mean perhaps the last 2 seasons, but the years where he was putting up 44, 52 points. You look at the top of the table in your fantasy league, almost guaranteed the teams in 1 through 3 had one of these guys, Evander Kane, one of the Tkachuks. So I'm going to go a little risky, and I'm going to say Tom Wilson. 133 penalty minutes, 228 hits. I know the points have been down, but he only played 74 games. I know there's an injury risk here as well. So the caveat was I'd also be looking at Jacob Chychrun in this spot. Maybe Pierre-Luc Dubois comes out and is a sleeper, scores 65 points or something. I'm going to go with Tom Wilson. Hope that he gets back up near that 50-point mark, which I think he can do playing on the top line with Ovi and Strome, which it looks like he's going to get. He gets power play time as well. You've been selling me on these peripherals. And if my man is putting up 228 hits and over 130 penalty minutes, I'll take whatever else he brings by association, 169 shots on net and otherwise. But it's Tom Wilson at 5 for me, Steele, because I do think with all those improvements, you're going to see a bit of an uptick in points from him, and you know he's going to be bringing the banger league beauty in him. So at number 5, I'll take a risk on Tom Wilson.
Look, I actually don't think it's much of a risk. I think the riskier picks are with Pierre-Luc Dubois and Jacob Chychrun. So I'm going with Tom Wilson at the number 5 target as well. I know there is the injury concern, so maybe that is the risk factor right there with injuries in his past. But
I like him this year, Steele. Sneaky.
I like him a lot too, and I think people overlook him because of what he doesn't do offensively and what he doesn't bring to the table on a year-to-year basis. But on a year-to-year basis, when you look at the peripherals, you said it yourself, banger league beauty, 133 penalty minutes last year, 228 hits, 74 blocks, still had 170 shots on net. He had a 10.7 shooting percentage last year, and then went 3 straight seasons the year prior of over 15% in the shooting percent category. So even though he doesn't shoot the puck as much, he's still scoring a ton of goals for the amount that he puts the puck on net.
That's a good point.
I agree with you. I think he can get back up to 45, maybe 50 points this next year. He's on the top line with Ovechkin and Strome. He's on the top power play unit as well. He's going to get his. He's a banger league beauty. I think the riskier players to go with are Pierre-Luc Dubois. Not to say that Dubois and Chychrun can't finish ahead of Tom Wilson if they can get back into the form that we know they once were. If Jacob Chychrun can get into form of being that star caliber defenseman that we've been trying to see from him for 4 or 5 years now, there's a chance that they both finish ahead of Tom Wilson because of the offensive potential they both bring, as well as the peripheral categories. But to me, the riskier draft picks are both with Dubois and Chychrun, even though Tom Wilson sometimes, like you said, 35 points this last year, 22 points the year prior. He did have the career high 52. Even with a 35 to 40 point season, those peripherals all add up. He actually did finish 5th amongst Washington Capital players for fantasy points last year, just below Dylan Strome. At 100, just below Dylan Strome. So I think Tom Wilson actually falls just, around a round or 2 below Dylan Strome of where he'll be drafted. I could see Tom Wilson going 10th or 11th or maybe 12th on the lower end right now for everything that he does peripheral wise.
Totally agree. I love that. I love when we're in simpatico, pal, because sometimes these lists, hashtag Seattle Kraken, they get a little murky. By the way, if you've missed any of our league-wide breakdown, you know what it is. Tap into the channel. We have already been through more than half the league. We'll wrap up the rest of the NHL, the rest of August. And Steele, I'm hyped for September. We're going to have all kinds of new content, new segments, breakdowns, mock drafts live on air. And we haven't even spoken about what our plans are for our upcoming listener leagues. Might get real serious up in here, Steele. But let me wrap up with this, because I can't come on here and not talk about one of my young guns that I've had my eye on. And it's Connor. It's Connor McMichael.
Oh yeah, it is, baby.
But hey now he's going to get a chance to play with some better players. And I know he had a little bit of a look with Ovi last year, but he's much more comfortable on the left side. And that's where he should play. Pierre-Luc Dubois, that's an upgrade. Say what you will about fantasy-wise, but that should help. Andrew Mangiapane, things are going to get spread out a little bit more. Let me talk about my boy for a hot minute, because I know 33 points in 80 games last year doesn't jump off the page. He's 23 years old. He has killed it in the AHL. He's proven he can play at that level. Also 10 points in 20 games for the Hershey Bears on their route to the Calder Cup. So he was a big reason for that success. And I think, Steele, in deeper formats, you know what I'm going to say, Keeper Dynasty, I'll be having a real long look at Connor McMichael at the end of the draft as someone who rounds out my team as maybe a backup forward, or perhaps my last guy off the board, because he is still a work in progress. However, I had to come on here and give him a plug. He also performed well at the World Juniors for Canada in both his performances, so he can get it done on the big stage. Let's see what he does. He's a real deep sleeper in Keeper Dynasty leagues.
Deep sleeper. He was only rocking at 4% last year, but finished with 18 goals, 15 assists. Hey, the peripherals are getting up there as well. 135 shots for the young man in Washington. For me, not a draftable player. Maybe keeper leagues, you take him on the lower end, but hey, maybe he goes on a hot streak one week, you pick him up, and he continues to dominate for this Washington Capitals group in the top two forward lines right now. Real quick before we wrap things up, I just want to talk about Jacob Chychrun and Pierre-Luc Dubois. For me, Jacob Chychrun does fall right there behind Tom Wilson on the draft board of where I would take him. So he would be the sixth option, even though he hasn't still lived up to the expectations of his NHL career. He did still finish with a career high 40, or tied his career high 41 points in 82 games. He had 60 penalty minutes, 204 shots, which is a career high, 154 blocks, which was a career high, also 72 hits last year with the Ottawa Senators. So even though maybe was a little bit of a liability on the defensive end of things in Ottawa last year, I do expect him to be a lot better this year in Washington.
He started great, just fell off.
He started great, fell off in the second half. Exactly right there, Flip. Just literally, we went through the statistics last year. He fell off in the second half, especially after the All-Star break. But I could see up to 50 points for Jacob Chychrun. Just got to be a little bit better in his own zone. Pierre-Luc Dubois, also interesting player fantasy-wise. I think, maybe I think there's still going to be people that reach on him. I think there's going to be people that sleep on him. You got to find the balance of where he really wants to go. It's tough for a guy who has really fell off the last two seasons and has been traded multiple times now throughout his career. He's been the common denominator of, what goes wrong with the organization or what the roster is. Hopefully that doesn't follow him to Washington, but I would still be very happy drafting this player somewhere in the middle to lower end of the draft, just pinpointing exactly where is going to be the difficult part. But to me, still a draftable player for what he brings to the table. Just got to be wary about, again, the in between the ears going on up there up top for Pierre-Luc Dubois. However, that is it for today's episode of the Washington Capitals. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Once again, make sure you hit the subscribe button, the follow button. Check out Locked On Sports Day's YouTube channel. They're here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering every single league. Also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Have a great day out there. Good luck with your bets tonight, or good luck with your bets this summer. And we shall see you back here again on Friday.
Peace.